Today, Bitcoin sinks to its lowest level since April, and we're on the ground in Palm Beach, Florida for the Clear Street Disruptive Technology Conference, and I sat down with one of the speakers, Ari Redbord of TRM Labs, about the changing crypto policy landscape in the US. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Talia Kaplan in Palm Beach, Florida for the Clear Street Disruptive Technology Conference. We'll have more from here on the ground in just a moment, but let's first get a check on markets. Crypto investors are sifting through a wave of good news this morning. First, Nvidia reported earnings after the bell yesterday, and the blowout quarter soothed Wall Street's fears that AI hype was fading. Then this morning, we got the jobs numbers for September, which were delayed due to the government shutdown. The data was worth the wait, though, showing the U.S. added 119,000 jobs in the month, more than twice what experts expected. That said, the rosy picture for the labor market is dimming hopes that the Fed will cut rates in December. Now, with the deluge of news for investors to make sense of, crypto prices are moving lower as of noon Eastern. Bitcoin fell to the $87,000 mark, but that's after it spiked to $92,000 after Nvidia posted earnings. Ether fell to $2,857, and Solana's Sol token dipped to $132. All right, let's jump right to more here on the ground at the Disruptive Tech Conference. The event is bringing about 300 crypto and fintech players together for fireside chats, one-on-one meetings, and more. We're also hearing from high-profile leaders in the crypto space like Michael Saylor, Anthony Pompliano, and Eric Trump. Crypto World is here on the ground for exclusive conversations with some of the speakers at this event. Now, this morning I spoke with Ari Redbord, Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs, about the changing U.S. regulatory environment and the state of crypto crime. We're here in Palm Beach, Florida. You're actually based in D.C., though, and you spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill meeting with lawmakers, discussing crypto. And we have seen some major regulatory advancements for crypto here in the U.S., especially in recent months. Over the summer, we saw the passage of the Genius Act stablecoin regulation bill. It became the first major piece of crypto legislation to become law here in the U.S., major milestone. Now all eyes are on crypto market structure. We saw a little bit of a pause because of the longest government shutdown in history. But just last week, the Senate Agriculture Committee actually released its draft of crypto market structure of a bill. So what do you think about all the progress we're seeing on Capitol Hill? How would you rate it? And do you think, realistically speaking, with that government shutdown in the mix, that we could potentially see a crypto market structure bill become law by the end of the year, as many in the industry had hoped?
Terrific. I'll start there. I think probably not. I think even Senator Scott, I want to say yesterday, came out and said that he's now tracking sort of early next year for market structure. But we're going to see significant movement over the next couple of months to get us there. So remain really hopeful. And I think, honestly, the beginning of next year would be a pretty huge win for the industry if it even moved that quickly. But backing up a second, it is extraordinary when you ask me sort of to rate things, right? And I think what we have to remember is where we were a year or a little bit more than a year ago, right? Where we had absolutely nothing. And today you mentioned Genius, where we have the first real meaningful bill to regulate stablecoin activity in the United States. Now we have a regime, and we see the U.S. Treasury Department. I think I've responded to at least 2 requests for information in the last 3 weeks at the U.S. Treasury Department on how now to implement the Genius Act. We have a 153-page report from the White House that details almost every aspect of how to regulate the crypto industry, whether it's SEC, CFTC, taxation, anti-money laundering, the stuff we're focused on at TRM. We have a crypto task force at the SEC that has done incredible work providing clarification to the market. We have a crypto sprint happening at the CFTC. We're going to have a CFTC chair in the next couple of days, likely. So I would say when I'm talking about just rating what's happening, we are moving at unprecedented speed on crypto regulation and legislation in really sort of, in the executive branch and in Congress as well. So I think it's an extraordinary moment. We're going to get market structure. When we've talked to members of Congress, I think a lot of them are, hey, look, this is complicated stuff. And the reality is they're getting up to speed very, very quickly. And we've always thought of market structure as who's going to regulate the space. Is it the SEC? Is it the CFTC? But there are other issues in there. There's a lot of conversation around DeFi and what DeFi regulation could potentially look like. So there's a lot of complex pieces to this, and we have clarity already passed in the House.
Right.
We now have 2 sets of discussion drafts from Senate Ag and Senate Banking. Those are going to be put together, and we're going to have something, but my guess is it's going to be early next year.
So how would you say the US stacks up to the rest of the world as it relates to crypto regulation? When you spoke with CNBC back in January, you mentioned that with this new administration, this pro-crypto administration, and all the appointments that are pro-crypto, including the first ever crypto czar, David Sachs, that we're on track and could potentially even surpass other regions around the world as it relates to crypto. Do you still feel that way?
I love it. I'm very rarely right. You can ask my kids, but I was here. I really think I was here. And I was in Singapore last week, and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, for example, has had crypto regulation in place for almost a decade. We've seen the JFSA, the Japanese regulator, have been regulating the space, I think a first ever regulator. We have MiCA, the marketing crypto assets legislation in Europe. So we already have licensing regimes all over the world, and we in the United States do not have a federal licensing regime still. So I think that in that sense, we're still behind. But when you think about how fast we're moving, I mentioned all those different aspects of things that are going on. I think we are catching up and potentially have the possibility to surpass if the legislation, and I think we see this with Genius, and I think that's where we're heading with market structure, really doesn't attempt to stifle innovation, but really allows the ecosystem to grow and flourish. And I think that's the type of policy that we're seeing. And then remember, it's not just what the legislation it says, it's how we implement. And I think right now we have an SEC leadership team that's very, very focused on crypto and doing it right. I think the US Treasury Department is very much in the same place. So I think we're going to see great legislation, and I think we're going to see implementation in a really meaningful way. So I would say that yes, I think we're still tracking exactly. And to be honest, I don't think we're behind even from what a timeline should have looked like. We're moving really, really fast. To have legislation within the first year of this administration, and then to have market structure, early next, I think that's pretty extraordinary progress.
You have an impressive background, experience with the DOJ and Treasury. And because of your background, I'm curious also as to your take on the Trump administration's efforts to advance crypto. How would you rate their efforts? I know it sounds like you're bullish on their efforts, but can you just take us through briefly a rating?
Yeah, I think it's really been extraordinary. I think really pushing the regulatory, the regulators in particular, right? I think one of the things that I really was extraordinary about the 153-page report that came out of the White House was it said to the SEC and the CFTC and Treasury, hey, look, we might not have market structure immediately, but you should go out and provide the clarity that you can to the business community out there that's building here. And I think we've really seen that. And I think so when you think about what the administration can do, the administration can only have so much effect on what's happening on Capitol Hill. That's the beauty of separation of powers. But at the end of the day, it can really have an impact on the executive branch. And I think we've seen that. And I think that's been really, really thoughtful. The other piece, obviously, I'm thinking about all the time is how are we using our authorities to go after the bad actors within the space, right? The ecosystem is growing, it's flourishing. We're seeing institutional adoption. We're seeing banks get involved in this. We're seeing ETF activity. It's more important that we keep it safe than ever. And I also think I've seen this administration take action against bad actors who are taking advantage of transformative technology. Just one quick example, about 2 weeks ago, the administration across a bunch of different components, the United States Department of Justice, the FBI, the US Treasury Department took action against Prince Group, which is a Cambodian scam, was basically running these pig butchering scams. We're running these scam compounds that are basically trying to essentially steal cryptocurrency. As part of that, there was a forfeiture action where DOJ filed a forfeiture against $15 billion, the largest by far in US, probably world history, to take back funds that were stolen from victims of these pig butchering type of scams in crypto. So there are things that should be happening simultaneously: sound, thoughtful regulation and clarity for the industry, and go after the bad actors who are abusing the technology.
So on a high level, TRM Labs is a blockchain intelligence company. You offer forensic services and risk management. You work with federal agencies like the FBI, the IRS, and you're able to track blockchain activity as it relates to illicit activity like sanctions evasion and anti-money laundering. So how would you categorize the trajectory of crime throughout the years? Obviously, 2022 was a very bad year. I believe we saw a little bit less crime activity in 2023. Is it still going down because law enforcement is more aware with groups like you? And what can we expect in 2026 as it relates to crypto crime?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think one thing we're seeing law enforcement globally get better at tracking and tracing the flow of funds in crypto, right? I mean, it's so unique that we are able to track and trace funds on an immutable public ledger where every transaction is logged and immutable. And we're seeing law enforcement globally use tools like TRM to do that. But the reality is that this ecosystem is growing at unprecedented speed and scale. And I'm not just talking about the price of Bitcoin. I'm talking about proliferation of stablecoins and financial institutions getting involved. And as the ecosystem grows, we're going to see bad actors gravitate towards it because bad guys go to where the money is. And the money today is in crypto. So we are seeing, we saw a record-setting number of wrench attacks or violent crimes associated with crypto, over 50 today. You're talking about a kidnapping or threatening someone for their private keys. It's been a record-setting year for hacks. We've seen about 2.7 billion in hacks, according to TRM, in 2025. We've seen 53 billion stolen in scams and fraud since 2023. And that number is likely much bigger because victims of scams don't typically report. So the reality is that we're seeing two things happen at the same time, which really makes sense. The ecosystem is growing in a lawful way, and yet bad actors are trying to take advantage of this growing ecosystem. And to me, the answer has always been the technology, right? We can now investigate crimes in crypto in ways we never could in the traditional world. And I think we're really seeing that. The Prince Group case is an extraordinary example, but really not just that. We're seeing FBI and DEA and Secret Service and HSI investigate and then work to seize back funds. So I think the reality is bad actors are moving faster than ever before, but we're building things at TRM and working with law enforcement to allow us to move as fast.
Now, last month, TRM released its crypto adoption and stablecoin usage report for the first half of 2025. One key point, the United States was among the countries that ranked highest for crypto adoption globally. Other countries include Pakistan, India, and Brazil. Another key point, US crypto activity surged by around 50%. What jumped out to you from this report for the first half of 2025?
I think it's exciting, and I don't want to overstate it. I think we've consistently over the last few years seen US crypto activity, crypto adoption accelerate at a similar pace. But I think a lot of the stuff that you and I have been talking about, I think we're seeing finally legal clarity, regulatory clarity in the space. I think this administration has been very bullish. I think we're seeing builders stay onshore as opposed to building elsewhere in the first 6 months of 2025. And I think we're seeing that trend continue into the latter stages as well. So I think that all these different factors are really leading to seeing the US adoption continue. Part of that is the administration, part of it is what's happening on Capitol Hill. But honestly, the thing I'm most excited about is the institutional adoption we're seeing. I would say a year ago, we were spending much of our time with law enforcement and regulators. And today that's flipped, where we're spending so much more time with financial institutions that are just figuring out, should we custody digital assets now in the wake of Genius? Should we offer digital assets to customers? And we're working with so many banks now, which to me means the ecosystem is growing in a really meaningful way.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today, but we'll have much more from this conference in tomorrow's show, including exclusive conversations with Eric Trump and Strategy's Michael Saylor. We look forward to seeing you then.